seminar is about living off the grid. You want to grab one of those flyers and pass it down to that gentleman. This is the online resources of the things I'm going to be touching on, so that if there's a piece of this, like for instance, the guy in Colorado, he and his wife have a house and everybody within sight is off the grid, and they've been off the grid for years, and they're in a nice big house, completely self-contained. You can go and click on that link and you can go see the video of what I'm talking about. But I'm just going to have one still slide and keep going. So every one of these has, for the most part, a video link on the internet that has like a video telling you all those things. So the paper will be real useful to you. My real job, Steve's an electrical engineer. I'm not. I'm a university professor. I teach for a number of schools, and one of my hats that I wear when I teach for ITT Tech is I teach construction management, of which one course is sustainable construction, which fits into this. So that's where I come from, and yes, I've had a class with one student, but usually about 20 or 30. The first thing I'd like to address is when the gentleman in the last session was asking about, so you're saying investing in this costs X thousands of dollars and I can buy it for 15 cents off the power grid? He was really surprised that that's true. And Steve talked about payback time, 8 years, 10 years, whatever. For myself, as Steve mentioned in his presentation, if the only reason you would look at alternative energy is to save money of what the power grid is, you won't do it. Because the power grid is very cheap, very cheap. In our state of Washington, we have a whole bunch of dams, Bonneville, and all of them are hydroelectric, and that's the cheapest power. There's wind. We came over by Bakersfield through Mojave Desert. There's great big wind farms. There's big wind farms in Washington State. There's 2 big wind farms areas. So we have ways within our grid to make electricity and provide it to our homes really inexpensively. That is not the reason why you would seriously spend money on alternative energy to compete with that. The reason, personally, why this is of great interest to me is I think that we are in trouble. I think our country's in trouble. I think our grid is in trouble. I think our dollar is in trouble. I think that many, many levels, our world economy, everywhere you look in the news, everything's on a thread. And all it would take is one interruption and it could domino affect life as we know it. And for me in my house, I'm planning to reposition myself so that I'm going to be more sustainable when times get hard. Not if times get hard, they're going to get hard. And when they do, we're going to find ourselves reverting back to the way things were 100 years ago. So I think we're going to see some really tough times. Let's just take one scenario. One of the links on here is called Urban Danger. I highly recommend that you watch that video online. Really, really eye-awakening. There's one gentleman in there that they interviewed that's a United States 10-term senator. He's an elderly gentleman. He's been in Congress for a long time, and he's like the chairman of the Bioterrorism Committee or something like that. He's really in the know. And he said if you knew how vulnerable our electrical grid is, it would scare you to death. The government doesn't want you to know how outdated and vulnerable it is. All it would take is a EMP, which is electromagnetic pulse, terrorist attack, which could even be in a van driven into a city and blown up. Or the one that would take the whole country out would be one that's shot up in the sky 200 miles in the center over the United States. When it blows off, it wouldn't hurt you at all. You wouldn't feel it. It'd be silent, and all the electrical grid would go out. And there's yes.
Why does that? Why would the surge cause that? Those electromagnetic storm. What does it do? I mean, is it induction?
Here's our electrical engineers. Do either of you know?
You get generally right between here and Mr. Leiske, we have a 0.1 volts per meter of just magnetic field and stuff like that. With an EMP pulse, though, you get tens of thousands of volts per meter. So just between you and me, if you have a piece of wire going from here to there, that wire will have 300,000 volts on it, and this side has 0. So you can see, like, most electronics surprise with 6 volts.
Yeah, right.
And it's
Okay.
on. Yeah.
But no amps.
What's that?
No amps, just volts.
No, yeah, mostly just, well, there's the current behind it too, but generally for the sensitive electronics, you don't need much, just
Right.
But just look at the storm they had in the east.
Exactly.
It took out, in New York, it took out a major transformer. How long did it take to get that fixed? And all the electrical connections that got
Right, right. Well, and this same gentleman, this U.S. Senator on that video you can watch on one of those links there, it's by far the best one that we've run onto, and I've been researching this for a long time. He says that the trouble is there's about 13 major substations in the United States that EMP could take them all out, and all of the microelectronics in the country. Think about that for a second. Everything you own, everything right here is microelectronics, from the camera to the, anything with microelectronics that's on.
No, off or on.
Oh, I'm sad to hear that. I thought, okay, and I was researching one place and they said you could take this, if you have a piece of electronic equipment that you really want to make survive. I've been watching a show that's kind of hokey, it's on TV, it's called Doomsday Preppers. And it's a reality show where they go and visit these people that are preparing for the worst, which is way overboard of where I'm at. They've got, one guy has enough ammunition to kill everybody in the county 13 times. And I'm thinking, you are going at this way wrong than me. I am so opposite of that. I don't even own a gun. But I have some of the same concerns that they do. Except that I'm a Christian and I think it's going to have a happy ending for those that have their priorities right. So anyway, please.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
But if you had equipment in a lead shielded
Yes,
room?
that's what I was trying to get at, and I got off track. They said, one of those prepper guys said, that if you have it in a shielded container, and they sell some containers to put them in, or put it down in a well, then the EMP won't get it, theoretically. But we've never had one, so we don't know. Anyway, we've got good reasons to be concerned. The question is, how long would you last? So let's say, for whatever reason, you can watch the news from New Jersey, from the hurricane, as an example, it's reality check. But let's say an EMP went, and all the electronics went out. Now the grid is down, we have no electricity nationwide. How long, think about your own housing, your own livelihood, your own supply of food, your own supply of water. How long would you last? And I was just telling, what's your name again?
Hassan.
Hassan?
Yeah.
Hassan and I were talking a minute ago. We lived 35 years in the country. We heated with wood, had our own screen, had all this stuff, We weren't into the alternative energy yet. But we were pretty self-sustaining, country bumpkins, And then in Washington, and then we decided to spend the winters in Arizona, Hey, that's great, and it is great. I mean, look at the weather. I'm short sleeved. So we started doing that, and we had 27 acres, and it's like we'd come back, and the lawn is this tall, and there's so much to do. It'd take us 2 months. We said, we got to downsize. This is crazy. So we got to get something like we have in Arizona, a little house on a city lot, no maintenance. So we did. So we sold out, and we bought this city, built a house on a 60-foot wide lot, and we don't have any maintenance. It's the HOA dues, mow the lawn, and everything. It's great, I mean, I'm 60. That's the way it ought to be, right? Then I started thinking about this stuff. That brand new house up there, they had 5 days with no power last winter. Our son lived there. They had a foot of snow. We would have, if we were there, we'd have water until the tank ran out, because it's on a big tank. But there's no electricity. Our fireplace runs on gas, but it's electronically controlled, so we couldn't even light it with a match. Refrigerators would go down, freezers are down, everything's down. Can't eat. Snow on the ground, you can't eat. I mean, it's crazy. So my wife and I have taken real seriously, particularly after we started watching that one video I told you about. We're rethinking all this. And how long would you last? Traditionally, if it was Phoenix, big city, power's down, you can't buy gas, you can't go to the store and buy anything because the cash registers don't work. You can't buy gas because they're pumps with electrical, etc., etc. Everywhere you look, you're in trouble. 3 days. The grocery store shelves will be empty in 3 days. Completely. Now what are you going to do? Now, the masses in the inner cities are going to go nuts. And they're going to start looting and stealing stuff and, you know, that's why these guys have all these guns and everything, because they know people are going to come to them looking for help. We hope to have a big enough garden that if you come to us and need help, we're going to give you food instead of shooting you. But anyway, that's a different perspective. Okay, so we're so dependent on electricity. And this is the urban danger I was telling you about, living in the city limitations. Now, if you live in the country, which is where we're going to go back to, then you can provide off your land, just like America did 100 years ago. You can have a garden, you can go hunting and fishing, you can have a supply of water, you can have trees, get firewood, and all that sort of thing.
You're going to need a horse though, because your car won't work.
That's true. That's true. We have an 89 Honda Accord with no electronics on it, and we're not selling it because if all the microelectronics are gone, that car might work until we run out of gas. Okay, here's some reasons. There are different reasons why people think about living off the grid, and they're not the same. One is necessity. I heard of one guy, a friend of mine, who lives 50 miles off the pavement. 50 miles off the pavement in the United States, in Idaho. That guy obviously is off the grid. So the only way he's going to have electricity is to make his own. Okay. The next one is cheaper installation. I have some acquaintances. They live in Port Townsend, Washington, and they're retired educators. They built a house on 5-10 acres, and they are not very far from the power grid, but it was going to cost them $15,000 to extend the power lines to their location. They put in a self-contained off-grid system that they've now been using, I think, for 11 years, and it cost them about $12,000, and it's free. You know, so instead of having to pay $15,000 to hook up and then have to pay that bill every month, you know, I talked to them just less than a couple of weeks ago, and they are still thrilled to death with what they've done. They don't regret not having hooked to the grid. So that's depending on the location, that can be a reason. Next one is power interruption preparedness. Like I just talked about. If you live in a place where you could lose power in critical times, like here I was hearing on the news, the power was out when it was 120 degrees and some elderly people were dying because they didn't have air conditioning. We have the opposite problem. When it's cold and the power goes out, you don't have the heat. Another reason that Steve talked about it is it could be an investment. If your life expectancy of a big blown solar system is 20 years and it pays for itself in 10, and you can afford to do it, that might be a good investment. It also increases the value of your real estate that you're going to sell later on. And the reason that I'm thinking more about it is being prepared for worst case scenario, and if you watch that Doomsday Prepper show, they call it a bug out. These people have property out in the mountains. Steve actually owns a piece of property that would work great for a bug out. It's, what, an hour and a half from here? 5 acres up in the trees, got water, it's got trees, got land. People, everybody in the whole valley are off the grid. Anyway, so there are different reasons to take a look at.
All 14 of them.
All 14 of them, yeah.
Where is it?
What's that? Pine Flat, just west of Mayor, about 8 miles.
Oh, okay.
Mayor, we're 69 east of 17.
Okay.
There's actually a link on the bottom to a website that shows where it is with a map and everything, because he happens to have it for sale. I might as well tell you right now, the reason it's for sale is because he married my daughter and she wants to live in Washington, so we're looking for a place up there similar. Okay, is electricity an absolute necessity? Really not at all. We are so used to it that we think it is, but it really isn't. The cheapest way to plan for alternative energy electrical is to not use electricity. It's way cheaper to downsize your needs of electricity than it is to build the infrastructure to do it. So the first thing you'd want to do, like that meter that Steve showed you in the previous seminars, you go around and figure out everything and chart it out. There's sheets on the internet, you can fill them all out, figure out look at your kilowatt hour bill, and figure out what of this do I really not need. And so you could get down to the real basics, or you may not have to do any of it, because 100 years ago they didn't have any electricity for the most part, and they lived just fine. Okay, so interrupt anytime if you have any suggestions or questions or comments. So let's look at our basic needs. You need food, you need water, you need shelter and protection from the elements, whether it's protection from the heat of the summer sun, or whether it's protection from rain or snow or cold. So those are kind of your basic needs, is how to keep going and be comfortable. Oops, sorry. Let's see how far I went here. Okay. So first of all, let's look at, by the way, this is pine flats right here. Pine flat, singular. Pine trees, so that's why they named it pine flat.
An hour and a half from here.
There are three things really that you need to survive as far as property is concerned. If you were looking to relocate to a place that would be more sustainable, there's three primary things. One is land. You need to have enough land to do a garden and that sort of thing. You need water, which is a really big deal here in Arizona, and trees, if you want to have a source of heat. Depending where you are, there may be places in the valley where maybe you don't really care too much about heat. I don't know. Most of the world you need heat. Water supply, vital. And we could go into how long you can live without air, 4 minutes, 4 hours, what is it, 4 days without water, and 40 days without food, that kind of a formula. So water is pretty high on the list. Another thing you need is waste removal. I like this picture. It's a log cabin outhouse. My wife got a big kick out of that. She thought maybe it had a solar panel on the roof. And if you live where it gets cold at night, you would need a source of heat, and wood is usually the best solution for that. Then you need a way to cook and bake, if you're going to cook and bake. Technically, you don't have to cook and bake. Have you ever thought about that? Animals don't cook and bake. We're the only beings on the planet that feel like we have to mix stuff together to eat it and have to cook it or bake it. So technically, you could eat raw and just eat what's available. I don't know how well balanced and flavorful it would be, but...
there's another danger in that too. You eat raw stuff, you get a lot of parasites and whatever else.
That's true.
A big reason to cook it.
Yeah, right. And same with heating the water too. Purify the water. Yes.
But I have a problem, because if everybody's burning and there's no wind, you're choking everybody to death.
Especially if you're all together. But if you're in a place where you're doing that, you're probably, like if there's 14 families in Pine Flat, I don't know that it would matter. Huh?
Yeah, it's 500 acres and about 10 stoves. If you use the high density ones, I mean, you can almost breathe the gas coming off the top. It's just like water coming out the top.
Yeah.
The newer ones.
Yeah. This stove actually is the one that we just bought for our future sustainable property. Being as we plan to buy property and they plan to move near us, we both bought stoves, and we don't know where we're going yet, but we both bought this very stove. This is an airtight, this isn't your grandma's stove, this is an airtight stove that has a big enough firebox that can heat your house overnight off the kitchen stove. So our house will not have a wood stove, but this will be the wood stove, and it has the optional water container on the side like grandma's did, that you dip it out of the top. And we also added a water jacket on the back that will have a faucet, and we also are going to get a boiler tank, like a hot water tank that will heat in there. So we'll have lots of hot water all off of this.
How do you heat the house with it?
There's also a water jacket in the back where you can cycle the water through your flooring. It keeps your flooring warm.
Yeah,
that's a really nice.
Which he wants to do. He wants to do the radiant floor heating. Haven't convinced my wife of that one yet, but... by the way, the neighbor up at that property I was telling you about, they have radiant floor heating in a $1.6 million house. You need hot water. That's important for things like, you know, getting rid of the bugs. So let's talk about what are the big consumers of electricity in your current housing. And like Steve mentioned in the last seminar, if you heat it, you're being really inefficient with electricity. Anything that's heating is the first thing to go. So an alternative is to do propane. It's not, most of these people that you see that live off the grid, they will also have a propane tank, and they do all of the heavy hitting heating things, hot water tank, wood stove, or heating stove, cooking. There's one other one. Anyway, a dryer. They'll do all those off of gas. And so it's a clean burning, it will last indefinitely, unlike gasoline. Gasoline doesn't last very long, it starts to deteriorate right away. Diesel lasts quite a long time. Propane, I'm told, will last indefinitely. So I know one guy who has enough propane, 1,500 gallons I think. And he's building a big, like 4,200 square foot, completely sustainable house in Carolina somewhere. I talked to him on the phone. And he has enough propane that if all of a sudden the world came to a screeching halt and you couldn't buy or sell anything ever again, he has enough propane to last him for 4 years. And that was only like 1,500 gallons, but obviously he's being more efficient. So propane has got an advantage because it's fairly inexpensive and it can be stored indefinitely. Okay, that's about sustaining forever, or indefinitely. So you need land, water, and wood. Those are the things you need for a piece of property that could be sustainable. Now the other things we talked about, you can downsize what you're doing with electricity. So what we've done now so far is we've gotten rid of the big heavy hitters, like your hot water, your cooking, your oven, your heating the house, and there was the other one, I forgot again. But anyway, those big ones that heat, you can do them another way. A hairdryer. That's a pretty big one, actually. Well, do you have to use a hairdryer to do your hair? Or could you just let it dry, go over the wood stove, that kind of thing if you had to? The other thing is, there's a thing called phantom. I guess it's a slide coming. But phantom are things that are consuming electricity that you don't even think about, that you could avoid. And we'll get to that in a second. Now let's talk about the different kinds of generating electricity. We talked now about how do you not use electricity, avoid using electricity, but you still want some conveniences. You know, there's some cooking equipment my wife really would like to have anyway. And so we're real serious about generating our own electricity. You can do it with the sun, solar. That's what Steve's presentation was about. Hydropower is using rain or water from a creek or that kind of a thing. Geothermal is heat out of the ground. Or it can be like a dairy farm taking the excrement and putting it in a pile that creates heat, you make steam, etc. Wind is a real popular one. I guess biomass would be the one with the cow manure type thing. Of these, from a personal home, sustainable situation, the most practical, number one is solar, by far. Now, you're in the epicenter of solar, right here. You're in the perfect location for solar. In Washington State, like Steve mentioned in his seminar, we're probably going to have to do 3 times the solar capacity in order to get the same power, but it's still the best solution because it's free, it lasts a long time, there's no moving parts, it doesn't break, you know. If you have property with a creek on it and it's going downhill, this is a really good solution. This is then by far the best solution because it runs 24 hours a day, even when it's dark. Solar only works when it's not dark. Geothermal, we don't have that kind of capacity. Wind, now if you're in a place where there's wind, we're hoping we can find that capacity and have a wind generator as well. So of the 3, solar is number 1. Hydro is not number 1 because it's hard to have property that has that capability, but if you did, you should look into that. And wind if you have the capability. Basically you need at least 8 miles an hour for a wind generator to start producing electricity, depending what kind of equipment you have. So, all of these are expensive and they're investing in the future. They're not the kind of thing that's going to save you money compared to 15 cents a kilowatt hour. On the other hand, if you're in this situation, now you don't have power. Now 15 cents doesn't make any difference because it's not an option. So as we talked about before, the reasons I'm interested personally is not because it's saving money, but because it'll be priceless when we don't have another option. So now let's look at the heavy hitters we mentioned earlier. Hot water tank. The way you could get around a hot water tank would be to either run it on gas, propane, and or run it off the heat off your wood stove. So the sustainable property we're hoping to build next is going to have both. It's going to have a propane tank in the garage, and it will also have a boiler, a 40-gallon boiler tank that will circulate out of the wood stove. The reason we need both is because in the summer, we're not going to run the wood stove because it's too hot. And so here's what the boiler looks like. It's got a coil in the wood box of the stove. The flames go on there. It automatically circulates because heat rises. And it'll get over 200 degrees in that tank as compared to like 120 in your electric hot water tank. You can also do it from the sun. This is not a photovoltaic. Is that the right way to say it? It's not one of these. It is like tubes of water in there circulating around, and then it heats the water in the tank. So they look the same. You can see them on the roof. They look similar. They're black. But you can tell when you look closely they don't have any electrical stuff in them. So that's a viable solution, especially here where you have lots of sun.
Do you have to purify the water so that it doesn't, gunk it all up?
Go back to the previous slide. You'll notice there's actually show the coil that's actually going through the tank there. You see the...
Where? You mean, want me to point?
Yeah. See how... Show
right here?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The heating is in a separate system, so your fresh water comes in. Show where the fresh water comes in.
This would be like antifreeze going through here, and this is a tank where the coil comes into the tank, radiates the heat. They're not the same water. So this water here that you're drinking, which could freeze if you were in a cold area, you wouldn't want it going out here. So this is an antifreeze kind of component that's a sealed thing, and then it just radiates it into here. Same with the wood fire, except the water that's circulating through the wood firebox is the water that you would be drinking. And it just comes and goes out of your system. Did that answer your question? Okay. Now another one is you can do a complementary system where you have the solar and the wood box both going to the boiler, and the boiler that we ordered will have both. It would have two sets of coils. It would have one coming from the solar panel, and then it would have one coming from the stove. Well, it wouldn't be a coil. Water circulating in here from the stove, and the water here is in its enclosed system with the solar panel. That way you'd have hot water in the summer. With the solar, you'd have hot water in the winter with the wood stove. Another thing is to conserve hot water. Do the military shower and that kind of thing, so you don't need as much hot water. Cooking and baking. We know that was done for many generations at the old wood stoves like this. My wife grew up on a farm with an old wood stove like that, and she assures me the bread is the best bread ever when it's baked in a wood stove. Unfortunately, I grew up in Washington, D.C., so I don't know what that's like. And then you have an interesting problem, and that is if you heat with wood, and now it's summer, it's too hot to heat with wood. So the people that do this all the time will have an outdoor summer kitchen. This one looks like it has gas stove here and it has barbecue and that kind of thing. They can be nice looking like this, or they can be something as primitive as a second-hand old stove sitting on the back porch to do your canning and all that kind of stuff. The other thing is that if you have an electric pump for your well, and then you don't have any electricity, then you won't be able to get the water. So unless you have a creek on the property, you need to get the water out of there. So they make a hand pump that goes on top of your electric pump. And we're planning to do that as well, just for that emergency kind of situation. They're not that expensive.
Do they have a hand generator that you can do with, hang on to the power?
I've seen one with a bicycle.
Flashlights. So then you don't have to, it'll...
I've seen people like on a bicycle generating electricity.
Yeah.
I'll let you do that while I do the pen pump. This is a really neat thing. that the property that we were just looking at in the last couple of months, that somebody made an offer just last week before we did, so we may not be able to get it. But it has a really nice creek going down a hill in this property. And there's some legal, complicated, all kinds of fisheries and governmental regulations and everything, and you'd sort of have to probably just do this stealthily, because if you ask permission, you might not get it. If you got in trouble, you could ask forgiveness, I guess. But this deal, this is really neat. This is called a surge pump. A surge pump, if you have water going downhill, you can create enough water pressure from the downhill to not only provide you with water, but also the pressure to push it up the hill. So what we were looking at is the creek was lower than where we put the garden. The creek would go downhill. It would go to this surge pump, which there's a guy on the internet that shows you. He built one out of parts from Lowe's, and he gives the whole parts list and the breakout diagram. It's cheap, $150 or something for the parts. You glue it all together, and it works. He didn't even know if it was going to work. He's videotaping him buying the parts, putting it together, and when it worked, he was so excited because it really does work. What it does is that part of the water goes into your water supply, part of it makes pressure. And it builds up in this chamber and it goes poof, 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 and it just keeps doing that day and night, poof, poof, and every time it does poof, it's a gate valve that switches back and forth, and it pushes the water up, pushes the water up, pushes the water up, and it'll go way up a hill, and then you can fill it in a tank, and now you've got pressurized water up higher than the creek. It's amazing technology, no electricity, and it's cheap. So anyway, that's pretty intriguing. You can look
I don't understand, which is the part that fills up with water?
This tower thing. This tower is where the pressure is. It's a sealed
Oh,
pipe.
so it's really kind of small.
Yeah, and this is a big one. This is bigger. This, by the looks of this guy, this might be in South America or something. But the water, there's a series of valves that automatically, when it gets to a certain pressure, it changes the valve. Okay. So the pressure, it's got air in here, and so it goes pressure, 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 gets to the point that the valve opens, and then it goes boom, because the air pressure is pushing, and then pop, 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 boom, pop, 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 boom, and it makes about that much noise. And it's no electricity. You could have it way out in the middle of nowhere and have water pumping uphill without electricity.
Also a ram pump.
A ram pump's another name. Yes, ram pump. Okay. Food supplies. Now again, we're talking about how you're gonna get by, when everything falls apart. Food supplies. What do you do when you can't go to the store, you can't go to the restaurant? Well, it'd be good to have a garden, it'd be good to have an orchard, it'd be good to have a greenhouse, or if you're not a vegetarian like us, you could hunt or fish. Now, the thing is, if the power goes out in 10 minutes from now and never comes back on, how many of these things are you prepared to be able to do right now? I'm not prepared to do any of them. We don't have the garden. We used to have a huge garden. Sold the place to downsize. Greenhouse. We don't have a greenhouse. We don't have an orchard. And in order to hunt and fish, you probably ought to have some guns and some animals, and we don't have any of that. So we're totally unprepared for that. So that's something to think about. Storing the food. There are ways, of course, that were done 100 years ago that didn't require a freezer. Root cellars, or an underground, keeps it cool. Even temperature, canning versus freezing. Drying food is another way. We talked about heating the house with wood. Now let's talk, now you're going to use electricity. So now let's use electricity inexpensively. We have offloaded the heavy hitter electrical things to things that are not electric. We have downsized using electricity on things we don't really need. Now let's look at the things we decided we still need and how we're going to do them efficiently. The compact fluorescent lights screw right into a regular socket. They are 1/10 electricity.
Yeah.
Is that about right?
Or 1/8.
1/8. And these are like 20th?
1/10.
1/10. So these are better. These are LEDs. They're new. They're more expensive, but these will last like 20 years. When these first came out, they were a big deal. There were government incentives to buy them. We replaced all the ones in our kitchens. Okay. We replaced all the ones in our kitchen. This is great. This is going to be great. We didn't know anything about them having mercury in them and all that. And one day my wife's in the kitchen, she got a knife in her hand, and one of those babies blew up, and just all the pieces fell out on the kitchen counter. I thought, what if I was standing underneath that? And we just said enough. We took them all out, threw them in the trash, and went back to the other ones. So when we make our move to be real sustainable, I'm really interested in LED lights, even though they're a little more expensive right now. They're coming down quickly. Costco's got them. Okay, phantom power. Phantom is things that are consuming electricity that you probably aren't thinking about, things that you really don't need. Think about what's going at night. At our house, my laptop is on, the screen is bright, my wife's laptop's on, the photocopy machine is on. There's a lot of things that are running. The stereo system is running, even though I've turned the TV off and but it still knows what channel it's still going to record when I want it to record. It still knows what time of day it is. All these things are phantom. They're just running. And they say it's about a third of having everything tooled up and going. So it's quite a bit of power. And I saw on the internet, a thing, actually it was a TV show, there's a thing called a green switch. Kind of a cool thing. It's a light switch that you can wire into a house that's already wired. You put it in here, and it's green, and it has a switch, and on the other end you have these little wireless strip plug-ins where you want them, and so you plug your printer and your fax machine and all that stuff in there. When you flip that switch, it just automatically turns all of the stuff off that's phantom. My wife says, well, I'm not afraid to just reach down and flip the strip off. I say, yeah, okay, that's good. So we maybe won't spend the money for a green switch.
Does that handle all of just the electric that's on that line?
Just whatever you've decided to put on it.
Yeah, not in another room?
Yeah, it's wireless.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so, so it's, the strip plug-in that's feeding all this stuff, you can have that strip plug-in plugged into that little remote control deal, and it shuts the power off. Or you can just simply reach over and flip the switch off, The point is, there's a lot of stuff running all night that you don't need running, and if you're having a hard time because you can't buy or sell, or the grid's down, or whatever, or your remote, then you need to think about those phantom things that aren't necessary. Turn the computer on when you need it, turn it off when you're done. And by the way, a battery-powered computer, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Electrical Engineer, is more efficient than a stationary computer.
Oh, by far.
Right?
Desktop.
Okay. Assuming you don't have to spend $120 to buy a new battery. Okay, let's talk for a brief second. Let's say, like, I've got neighbors here in the valley that have taken advantage of these incentives to put these huge rooftop solar systems on there. I was trying intrigued in doing that, but I'm only here 6 months and I don't think it would pay for me. But they're all excited. They're kind of a little club of them in our community that get together and try to talk everybody into doing it. The advantages are the government incentives. Let's say it costs $30,000 to put it in. The government incentives will pay like $8 grand of it because they want you to get off the grid, get off, quit using the grid. That's the goal. So the government gives you these incentives, and a professional comes in. They hook it all up. They've got one of those meters that you can sell it back to the power company, and they really get excited when the meter's running backwards, because it will run backwards at times. For me personally, the disadvantage is I have to be grid tied. I have to be hooked to the grid to do that. Steve in his previous seminar was talking about he's got gray receptacles next to his ivory ones in the house. The gray ones are off the grid. For his refrigerator is now plugged into the gray one, and if you need to, he just switches it back, that kind of thing. So if you want to have the option to go completely off the grid, which is what I would hope to do with my house when we get it built, is to be able to get it fine-tuned to where I really don't need the grid. Then I can just flip that switch and not be on the grid at all. You don't have the option if you've done this program. You have to be on the grid because they want to get the money back. They monitor it every month. And you do get some money back, but you have to do it. So for my interests of, the world's falling apart and now I really want to be independent of the grid, I wouldn't have the option if I took advantage of the government subsidies. Also, if I don't take advantage of the subsidies, I can put it together myself with the help of a licensed person, whereas here you have to pay some professional that I think is probably gouging the government. Steve?
In Arizona also, you only get paid, you only make 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour when you sell it back. You're buying at 12, but you're only selling it back at 3.5.
Washington State, you get dollar for dollar.
In Washington, you get,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep, if it's 15 cents a kilowatt, you get 15
So
cents.
is that another example of government control then?
Yeah.
So they monitor it, there's no free market in that whatsoever, that's a fixed legislative decision or something.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a gentleman in Oregon, and he's not on this list, I forgot about him, but if you ever go up I-5, just before you get to Portland on the right, there's a huge windmill on this guy's property. It's right next to I-5, 80-foot tower, great big blaze, things, oh, we had to stop. We just had to stop. And he had solar panels on the shop roof, the whole roof solar panels, and we pulled in and you know, a little nervous, you know, we're in somebody's yard. He came out, they were really nice. He's been in the front cover of a magazine and everything, and he puts out 5 kW power, and they pay him, you know, but it was all professionally done, and you know, he has to be on the grid. So the disadvantage, as far as I'm concerned, is you have no option. You have to be on the grid. You have to pay a professional installer to do everything, whereas Steve's an electrical engineer, I'm a technology teacher. We plan to put in our own solar arrays and not pay anybody to do it. Future government controls, we just talked about that. Feel free to interrupt anytime, you guys. We talked about these, the different kinds of ways to make alternative energy. One is, you know, Steve's session talked about the technical stuff of doing the solar system. His business that he has, easy power plant, there's one out there on the middle of the yard there in this little one. These are all turnkey, you just buy it and plug it in. But you can also build your own, like he was talking about. There's wind. Again, you need probably 8 miles an hour to get it to work fast enough to create electricity. Microhydro we talked about. Geothermal, that's getting heat out of the ground. Biomass is heat like from manure piles and stuff like that. Off-grid systems, it doesn't matter what way you get electricity, you're going to have these same components that Steve talked about. You're going to have a control, an inverter that takes it from 12 volts to 110 volts. You're going to have storage and batteries, and you're going to have a charge controller. These 3 components you're going to have no matter what kind of generating capacity you have. By the way, if you get to where you're really interested in, you know, you'll see on these videos if you check them out online, so rather than the golf cart type deep cycle batteries, a lot of these people will get these batteries off of a forklift. And they're 800 pounds, they're really expensive, but they last for like 20 years. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up by showing you some people been there, done that kind of a thing. I'm one that's going to do it. I'm one that's lived fairly sustainable in the past, but these are people that are doing it right now. And there are links on that sheet to these people. You can see most of the time it's videos and they give you tours of what they got. So, here we go. This one's in Montesano, Washington. This is actually my neighbor of the property that we sold. We lived on the 27 acres. This lady moved from Hawaii before we moved there and had a fair amount of money. She hired an architect from Seattle and an alternative energy consultant from California and built an absolutely beautiful 4,200 square foot house. She lives all by herself. Gorgeous. And has a 115-foot tower wind generator and 2 arrays of solar panels. And she's been completely, totally off the grid. Ever since the house was built. And must have been about, it's been about 20 years. She's completely off the grid. First class lifestyle. This lady is pure class. And she's got all the amenities. She said, and we visited her about a month ago for the first time, talking to her specifically about her being off the grid. Because she lives such a normal life. Such a beautiful house. She's been on Better Homes and Gardens magazine a couple times. And she's just a really classy lady, and people come to have tours of her place and everything. And we said, do you feel that this has ever been an inconvenience in your lifestyle? And she's not a bit. Not a bit. but she had the money to do it right. These folks, much more humble, these are the retired teachers that I was telling. She's a librarian, I think. They live in Port Townsend, which is further about an hour north of us, up there. And these are the people who were, it would have cost $15,000 to bring the extra power poles into where they bought the property. And they put in their whole system for $12,000. And they've now been doing it for, I'm thinking, 7 years. We talked to her on the phone here about a week ago. And she just wants a bigger wind generator, but primarily they get it all off of solar, and she doesn't have that many solar panels. It's not a huge house, but she says they had enough power to do her husband's shop and all that stuff. These folks, I've not been to these folks' house. They live on San Juan Island. So one scenario is you might live in a place where you're isolated and do not have electricity. If you're on Washington State has a whole bunch of islands in the San Juan Island chain, and some of those islands have no services at all. So if you happen to be wealthy enough to live on one of those islands, you'd have to generate your own electricity, and solar would be one of those. But this is a house in San Juan Island that's off the grid. This one video is a guy in Colorado. I highly recommend you watch this. This guy and his wife live in Colorado. Everybody in that view, sure don't see very many trees, kind of reminds me around here, but they live completely off the grid, and they've got a nice big house, and they have everything. He asked his wife on camera, he says, have you felt that we've sacrificed it all? Not a bit. Not a bit. They just don't use their coffee maker. That's about it. They have the whole house has a regular furnace, and they haven't used, that furnace hasn't been on in like 8 years. Yeah, they heat with wood. This one is in California, on the Sacramento River. Gorgeous place. I'm sure this has been in Better Homes and Gardens or one of those things. It's worth going to that site to see this beautiful place. And they've got solar panels for electricity. They've got solar panels for water. Wouldn't surprise me if they're doing some micro hydro. I'm not telling anybody because they're on a really big river. This is a really interesting video if you want to see roughing it. This is some folks in British Columbia is on the list. They were living in the city and raising their kids and everything, and they said, you know, we got to get out of here. And so they bought some property within driving distance of where they lived in British Columbia. They didn't say where, but one of his businesses is a film producer. So he documented on film everything from finding the land to figuring it all out to all the hardships they went through to making this transition, and their kids, you know, kind of reality show type thing. And they did finally get through a couple of winters and get everything done, and they're off the grid, and so it's kind of cool. So that's a pretty neat one. Oop, I was supposed to take this slide out of here. Oh, what happened? I gave you the old version. On your sheet, there is some people in Hawaii. This is on a TV newscast, and that's okay. These people, this house is completely off the grid. I doubt they had to do it because they're in Hawaii. But it's a beautiful house, state of the art, happened to be for sale, and everything's off the grid. And what amazes me is she says, in the video, she says, and maybe it was a mistake of I don't know, but they said, because we're off the grid, we have half of our burners are electric and half of them are gas. And I'm thinking, if half your burners are electric, you must really generate a lot of electricity, because that takes lots. But anyway, that's kind of
Where is it going?
I don't remember it saying. It was a newscast. But they did say it was for sale, so I would imagine it wasn't a secret. Last but not least, this is Arizona. This is Pine Flat. This is the old version because it has the S in it, Steve. Steve owns the property next door to this place. These folks are mutual friends of ours. They actually bought this 5 acres from a couple or an individual, I'm not sure which, who was getting prepared for Y2K. And so he built this thing completely self-sustaining off the grid, did a bang-up job of it, had a log, I think it's a log house, solar system, collecting rain off the roof, the neighbor has they have a well. Everything you need, trees, everything, the formula fits perfectly. And then Y2K came and went, So these guys, Steve's friends, bought it, got a really good deal on it. So now they've got this completely turnkey system. Did they build the second house themselves, or was that already there?
The log cabin was there for 50 years. This one was built about 20 years ago.
So it was already there when they bought it?
Yeah.
So they've got this house, and a log cabin, and a completely self-contained off-grid. It's really cool. We enjoy going up there and checking it out. But anyway, they're a situation where it's far enough off the paved road that nobody in that area has the grid. So there are, what, 14 families in, as far as you can see. And you can't really see any of them. They're kind of all hidden in the trees. But that scenario really intrigues me, personally. And as a matter of fact, if my daughter hadn't married Steve, he'd probably already have a house up there. Yeah, I'm sorry, Steve, I got the wrong one of these. On that sheet is a slide that was supposed to be here, and I have the old version of this. The first item, Sustainable Preparedness Expo, in February in Chandler. This is a game changer presentation. This is what got my wife and I completely into this whole thing. Melanie and Steve had been to this year before, and they said, come to this, and yeah, and we went and we just got all excited. It's free. It's a, do they do Friday night?
No, Saturday afternoon for a couple hours, and then 7 hours on Sunday.
Yeah, and they have like a little trade show with different booths and workshops. Everything's free. It's really good. Really good. Highly recommend it. And if you're interested, I had a phone number. Oh yeah, local contact, Melanie Brandula, just below it. If you want information about it, that's how. And then the link to their website. These folks live in northern Idaho, and what they do is they travel around and do these free seminars all over the country in the winter, and in the spring and summer they're at home living the lifestyle. They're off the grid and all that. They come with their RV and their trailer, and they set up and do all this neat stuff. They do a really good job. The other thing that I wanted to show you on the slide is the item on the bottom. If for some reason you're interested in some property that's within reach of here for either for moving to and living off the grid, or a place to have a cabin and live off the grid, or a place to have a bug out, the way the preparedness people call it. That's Steve's property that's next door to this one. Ooh, next door to this one.
Yeah.
There it is. Next door to that one.
What's the altitude?
5,800 feet.
Yeah. And so there's a link there. It shows you maps and all that stuff. Nice piece of property. If you hadn't married my daughter, you'd be staying. But Melanie said, if we get married, we're moving to Washington. He said, okay, honey.